Welcome to my expat stories. Right, this one's absolutely biblical because Gary's not some soft lad who got played. He's a 54-year-old warehouse supervisor from Sheffield who called it bollocks from day one. Bollocks when they met the birds at salsa class. Bollocks when they got invited to the Finca. Bollocks when his mate Kev said it's sound, trust me. But Gary went anyway because Kev's his mate. Been mates 30 years. And mates don't let mates go to Colombian fincas alone. And Gary's got the text to prove he knew it was bollocks before it even started. If you think knowing something's dodgy stops you doing it anyway, you're in for a proper treat here. Here's Gary. I'm stood in a police station in Bucaramanga, trying to explain to a Colombian copper, and the copper's looking at me like I'm talking absolute bollocks. Which is ironic because that's exactly what I said this whole trip was. Bollocks. Complete and utter bollocks. And I went anyway. I'm Gary. I'm 54. I'm from Sheffield. Worked in warehouses my whole life. Started loading trucks at 19. Ended up supervising the whole depot. Retired last year. Early retirement package. 28 grand payout. Pension sorted. House paid off. Living the dream me. I'm married. Sandra. 26 years. 2 kids. Both moved out. We're sound. She does her thing, I do mine. I go to the pub with the lads. She goes to book club. Works for us. Kev's been my mate since we were 24. Met him at work. He was driving forklifts, I was loading. We got on. Both massive Oasis fans. Both proper northern. Both liked a pint and talking bollocks. 30 years we've been mates. Best man at his wedding. He was at mine. Our kids grew up together. That's proper friendship, that. Kev got divorced 3 years ago. His wife Janet left him for some bloke she met at yoga. Took half his pension. He was gutted. Proper gutted. Spent a year moping about. Then he started going online. Dating apps. Said he was looking for someone real. Someone who wasn't Janet. He met Paola in January 2024. Some Colombian dating app. She's from Bucaramanga. Never heard of it. He showed me photos. She's fit. Maybe 38, 40. Long dark hair. Nice smile. He said we've been chatting 6 months. Video calls every week. She's the real deal, Gaz. I said, mate, she's in Colombia. You're in Sheffield. How's that going to work? He said, I'm going to visit. See where it goes. I said, that's bollocks. He said, what is? I said, Colombian dating apps. That's prime scam territory, that. He said, not Paola. She's different. Works in a bank. Got her own flat. Sends me photos of her life. It's legit. I said, if you say so, our kid. But it sounds like bollocks to me. He booked a trip. 2 weeks. August 2024. Then he goes, why don't you come with me? I said, what? He said, come to Colombia. Paola's got a mate. Marcela, single. Proper nice bird. We can double date, make a holiday of it. I said, Kev, I'm married. He said, so what? Sandra won't care. You're not doing anything dodgy. Just meeting people. Having a laugh. Come on, when's the last time we went on a lad's holiday? I thought about it. Sandra wouldn't care. She sound like that. I said, all right, let's have it. He said, yes, Gaz. It's going to be biblical. I told Sandra. She said, fine. Just don't be a dickhead. I said, I'm never a dickhead. She said, you're always a dickhead. But I love you anyway. Go, have fun. I said, sound. So we booked it. Me and Kev. 2 weeks in Colombia. August 2024. Flights to Bogota, then a bus to Bucaramanga. Kev was buzzing. Absolutely buzzing. Couldn't shut up about Paola. How he couldn't wait to meet her. How this could be serious. I said, mate, you've never met her. He said, I know her. We've been talking 6 months. That's more than I talked to Janet in the last 5 years. Fair point, that. We landed in Bogota on a Saturday. Got a bus to Bucaramanga. 6 hours through mountains. Proper stunning, to be fair. Green everywhere. Kev's on his phone the whole time messaging Paola, grinning like an idiot. I said, you look like a proper muppet. He said, shut up. You'll see. She's amazing. We got to Bucaramanga Saturday evening. Checked into a hotel. Nothing fancy. Clean. Aircon. Job done. Kev said Paola and Marcela want to meet us tomorrow. Take us out. Show us the city. I said sound. He said they suggested we do a salsa class. Learn some moves. I said salsa. Kev, we're from Sheffield. We don't dance. He said that's the point. It's cultural. Colombian. They love it. I said it's bollocks is what it is. He said, come on, Gaz. Don't be a misery. I said, fine. But I'm not wearing tight trousers. Sunday afternoon we met them at this dance studio. Paola and Marcela. Both fit. I'll give them that. Paola's how Kev described. Long dark hair, big smile. Marcela's a bit shorter. Curly hair. Tattoos down her arm. Looked proper Colombian. Not like she was trying to impress anyone. Just her. Paola hugged Kev like they'd known each other forever. Marcela shook my hand. Said, nice to meet you. I said, yeah, you too. She said, you ready to dance? I said, not really. She laughed. Said, I like honest men. The class was absolutely biblical. Me and Kev had no idea what we were doing. Two Sheffield lads trying to salsa, stepping on their feet, going the wrong way. The instructor kept shouting, feel the music, let it move you. I said, mate, the only thing moving is my back giving out. Marcela was pissing herself laughing. So was Paola. But they were sound about it. Showed us the steps. Didn't take the piss too much. After class we went for food. Colombian place. Paola and Kev were all over each other. Holding hands, giggling, proper loved up. I'm sat there with Marcela talking about Sheffield. She asked what it's like. I said, grey, rainy, full of people who hate Tories. She said, sounds sad. I said, it is a bit, but it's home. She asked what I did. I said, warehouses. Retired now. She said, and now you travel. I said, first time really. Never bothered before. Work, family, pub. That was my life. She said, and you're married? I said, yeah. 26 years. She said, why are you here without your wife? I said, because Kev wanted company, and Sandra trusts me. Marcela smiled. Said, that's nice. Trust is important. We spent the next few days with them, showing us Bucaramanga, Parque del Agua, Cabecera, cafes, markets. It was proper nice, actually. Marcela was sound, easy to talk to, didn't want anything, paid her own way. That impressed me. I'm not used to that. Usually birds want you buying drinks, meals, whatever. Not her. She insisted on splitting everything. By day 4, Kev's proper serious about Paola, talking about maybe moving to Colombia. I said, mate, you've known her 6 months online and 4 days in person. He said, when you know, you know. I said, that's bollocks. He said, no, Gaz. This is the real deal. She's different. That night, Paola suggested something. She said her uncle has a finca, country house, up in the hills. Beautiful place. Pool, BBQ area. Really peaceful. She said, why don't we all go this weekend? Stay 2 nights. Relax. Proper Colombian experience. Kev said yes immediately. Absolutely. Paola looked at me. Said, what do you think, Gary? I said, I don't know. Sounds a bit... I don't know. She said, a bit what? I said, I don't know. Just feels... I looked at Kev. He said, Gaz, come on. It's sound, it's her uncle's place, it'll be a laugh. I said, all right, fine. But if this is dodgy, I'm blaming you. Kev said it's not dodgy. Stop being paranoid. That night I texted Sandra. Going to some Finca this weekend. Kev's bird's uncle's place. Sounds like bollocks, but we're going anyway. She replied, try not to get kidnapped. I said, I'll do my best. Should have listened to my gut. Should have said no. Should have told Kev this whole thing's got bollocks written all over it. But I didn't. Because Kev's my mate, and you don't let your mate go to a Colombian finca alone. Even if it is absolutely 100% definitely bollocks. Friday came. Paola said the finca's about 2 hours outside Bucaramanga, up in the mountains. Her uncle's meeting us there. He doesn't speak English, but he's lovely. Very welcoming. I said sound. Kev said this is going to be top stuff, Gaz. I said if you say so, our kid. We piled into Paola's car, her driving. Marcela in the front, me and Kev in the back. Drove through Bucaramanga, out into the countryside. Green hills, coffee plants, farms, proper remote. The further we got, the more I thought, this is bollocks. This is absolutely bollocks. Why are we going to the middle of nowhere with 2 birds we've known a week? I said to Kev, you sure about this? He said, yeah, why? I said, just feels a bit remote, doesn't it? He said, Gaz, it's the countryside. That's the point. Relax. I said, I am relaxed. I'm just saying... It's remote. He said, you're paranoid. I said, I'm cautious. There's a difference. Paola heard us, said, don't worry, Gary. My uncle's place is safe. Lots of people go there, friends, family. It's very popular. I said, right, sound. She smiled in the mirror. Said, you're funny. So careful. I said, yeah, well, that's me. We drove for another hour. Turned off the main road, dirt track. Bumpy as hell. I'm thinking, where the hell are we going? Kev's still buzzing, talking about how this is proper authentic Colombia. How this is what travel's about. I'm thinking, authentic my arse. This is how people disappear. We pulled up to this place. Finca. Big house. White walls. Red tile roof. Pool out front. Few cars already parked. People sat around, music playing. Looked alright actually. Looked legit. I felt a bit stupid for being paranoid. Paola parked. Said we're here. Her uncle came out. Big bloke, maybe 60. Smiled. Shook our hands. Said something in Spanish. Paola translated. Said he's happy to meet us. Welcome to his home. I said cheers. Kev said this place is amazing, mate. Absolutely biblical. There were maybe 10 other people there, Colombians. Paola introduced us. Her cousin, her cousin's wife, some friends. Everyone was sound, friendly. Offered us beers, showed us around. The pool, the BBQ area, the rooms inside. It was proper nice. I started thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe this isn't bollocks. Maybe it's just a nice weekend in the countryside. We dumped our bags, changed into shorts. Came back out. The BBQ was going. Meat, chicken, chorizo. Smell was unreal. Paola handed me a beer, said, "Relax, Gary. Enjoy." I said, "Yeah." "All right, I am." She smiled, said, "Good." Kev was in the pool with Paola, laughing, splashing about. Marcela came over, sat next to me, said, "You having a good time?" I said, "Yeah, it's nice." She said, "You looked worried in the car." I said, "I'm always worried. That's just my face." She laughed, said, "I like that. Honest." We sat there drinking, talking. She asked about my life at Sandra, my kids, Sheffield. I asked about hers. She worked in marketing. Lived in Bucaramanga her whole life. Never married. No kids. Said she liked her freedom. I said, "Fair enough." She said, "Paola told me you called this whole trip bollocks." I laughed. Said, "Yeah, I did." She said, "Why did you come then?" I said, "Because Kev's my mate. And you don't let your mates do stupid things alone." She said, "That's nice. Loyalty." I said, "It's what mates do." Someone handed me another beer. I drank it. The sun was setting. Golden light over the hills. Music playing. People laughing. Kev's in the pool, having the time of his life. I'm thinking, you know what, maybe this is all right. Maybe Colombia's not bollocks after all. That's the last clear thought I remember. After that, everything gets fuzzy. The beer tasted normal. Felt normal. But something wasn't right. My head started feeling heavy. The music got louder. Or maybe quieter. I couldn't tell. Marcela was talking, but I couldn't hear her properly. I said I don't feel right. She said, "What?" I said I feel weird. She said, "You're probably just tired. The heat, the beer. Relax." I tried to stand up. My legs didn't work. I sat back down. Hard. Marcela said, "Gary, you okay?" I said, "No. I don't think I am." She said, "Let me get you some water." She walked off. I watched her go. Everything was moving in slow motion. I looked at the pool. Kev was getting out. He looked wrong too, stumbling. Paola was helping him, saying something. He wasn't answering. I tried to stand again. Couldn't. My vision went blurry. Someone was next to me, hands on my shoulders, saying something in Spanish. I said what? They didn't answer. Or maybe they did and I couldn't hear. Then nothing. Just black. Gone. Absolutely biblical bollocks. That's what this was, and I'd walked right into it. I woke up on a dirt road, not in a bed, not in the finca. On a dirt road, middle of nowhere. Sun's up, proper hot. My head's pounding like someone's taken a hammer to it. I tried to sit up. Couldn't. Everything hurt. My mouth tasted like I'd been licking ashtrays. I'm thinking, what the hell happened? I looked around. Kev's next to me, flat on his back, not moving. I said, "Kev." Nothing. I said, "Kev, wake up." He groaned, rolled over, opened his eyes, said, "Where are we?" I said, "I don't know, mate, but we're proper in it now." We both sat up, looked around, middle of nowhere, hills, trees, dirt road, no finca, no cars, no people, nothing. Just us. And all our stuff's gone. Phones, wallets, watches, bags, everything. Gone. Kev checked his pockets. Empty. I checked mine. Same. I said, "They've robbed us." He said, "What?" I said, "They've robbed us, you thick bastard." Everything's gone. He said, "No. No, no, no. Paola wouldn't do that." I said, "Paola absolutely would do that." And she did. Look around. We're on a dirt road with nothing. That's not a coincidence. Kev stood up, wobbling, nearly fell over. Said, "We need to find them." I said, "Find them? Mate, they're long gone. He said, no. Paola loves me. She wouldn't do this. I said, Kev, wake up. This was the plan. Get us out to the middle of nowhere. Drug us. Rob us. Dump us. It's textbook. He said, you don't know that. I said, I absolutely know that. I told you this was bollocks. I said it was bollocks from day one. And you said, trust you. So I trusted you. And now we're on a dirt road with no phones, no money, and no way home. Absolutely biblical this is. He just stood there, staring at nothing. Then he started walking. I said, where are you going? He said, back to the Finca. I said, it's 2 hours away, and we don't know which direction. He said, I don't care. I need to find Paola. I said, Paola's not there, you muppet. She's probably in Bucaramanga counting our money. He said, you don't know that. I said, I do know that. But fine, let's walk. Not like we've got a choice. We walked for about an hour, down this dirt road. No cars, no houses, nothing. Proper middle of nowhere. Kev didn't say a word. Just walked, looking gutted. I'm thinking 30 years of friendship, and this is how it ends. Stumbling down a Colombian dirt road because he trusted some bird he met online. Finally, a truck came past. Old bloke driving. We flagged him down. He stopped, looked at us like we were mad. Kev tried speaking to him. Broken Spanish. Pointing back where we came from. The bloke shook his head. Said something we didn't understand. Then he pointed forward. Said Bucaramanga. Gestured for us to get in the back. We climbed in, sat in the truck bed with some chickens and bags of coffee. The bloke drove us into town. Took about 90 minutes. Dropped us near the centre. I said gracias. He nodded. Drove off. We went straight to the police station. Tried to explain what happened. The copper spoke a bit of English. Asked what we wanted to report. I said we've been robbed. He said where? I said at a finca. Outside the city. We were drugged. When we woke up, everything was gone. He said, you have address? I said no. It was someone's uncle's place. He said someone who... I said my mate's girlfriend. Her uncle. He said, where is your mate's girlfriend now? I said, I don't know. Gone. He said, and you don't have address? I said no. He said, then I cannot help you. This is civil matter. Between friends. Not police matter. I said, civil matter. We were drugged and robbed. He said, you went to Finca with friends. You drank, you lost your things. This happens. You need to talk to your friends. Not police. I said, they're not our friends. They robbed us. He said, you have proof. I said, proof? I woke up on a dirt road. That's my proof. He shrugged. Said, sorry. Cannot help. Kev tried arguing. Said, Paola's a scammer. She does this to people. The copper said, you have evidence. Kev said, no. The copper said, then there is nothing I can do. File a report if you want. But I cannot investigate with no address, no names, no evidence. We left. Stood outside the station. I said, right. Now what? Kev said, I don't know. I said, we need to get to the British Embassy. Sort out emergency passports. Get money sent. Get home. He said, I need to find Paola. I said, Kev, forget Paola. She's done you. Accept it. Move on. He said, I can't. I need to talk to her. I said, talk to her? She drugged you and robbed you. What's there to talk about? He pulled out a scrap of paper from his sock. I said, what's that? He said, her address. I wrote it down before we left Sheffield. Just in case. I said, you wrote down her address. He said, yeah. For emergencies. I said, this qualifies as an emergency, mate. Let's go. We walked to the address. Took an hour. My feet were killing me. No money for a taxi. No phones to call one. Just walking. The address was a flat. Ground floor. Shabby building. Kev knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Nothing. He tried the door. Locked. I said, she's not here. He said, maybe she's at work. I said, or maybe this isn't even her real address. He said, it is. She sent me photos of this building, this door. I said, photos can be anywhere. Doesn't mean she lives here. We waited outside for 2 hours. No one came. No Paola. No Marcela. No one. Finally, a neighbour came out. Old woman. Kev tried asking about Paola. Showed her a photo on... Wait, he didn't have his phone. I said, how are you going to show her a photo? He said, I don't know. He tried describing her. Long, dark hair. Works in a bank. The woman shook her head. Said something in Spanish. Walked off. I said, that's it. She's gone. Kev said she'll come back. I said, no, she won't. This was a scam. She's not coming back here. This probably isn't even her real address. He said, it is. I know it is. I said, you don't know anything, mate. You thought she loved you. Turns out she was setting you up. He sat down on the curb, put his head in his hands. Said, I'm such an idiot. I said, yeah, you are. But so am I came with you. I knew it was bollocks and I came anyway. We sat there for a bit. Then I said, right, we need to sort this. We need to get to the embassy, get emergency help. Phone Sandra, get money sent. He said, how do we even get there? I said, we walk. He said, it's miles. I said, then we better get started. We walked to the British embassy. Took us 3 hours. When we got there, they were proper sound. Got us emergency passports sorted. Let us use a phone. I called Sandra. She answered. I said, it's me. She said, Gary, what's happened? Your voice sounds rough. I said, we've been robbed. Everything's gone. She said, what? I said, yeah. The Finca. It was a scam. Drugged us. Took everything. She went quiet. Then she said, I told you it sounded like bollocks. I said, I know. You were right. She said, are you safe? I said, yeah. We're at the embassy. Right. I'll wire you money. How much do you need? I said, 2 grand should do it. For flights and hotels till we get home. She said, done. It'll be there tomorrow. I said, Sandra, you're a legend. She said, I know. Just get home safe. And when you do, we're having words. I said, I know. The embassy sorted us a cheap hotel. Let us put it on a tab until Sandra's money came through. We got to the room. 2 single beds. Kev collapsed on his. Didn't say anything. I sat on mine. Looked at him. Said, you all right? He said, no. I said, yeah. Fair enough. He said, I thought she loved me. I said, I know, mate. He said, 6 months. I talked to her every day for 6 months. Video calls, messages, photos. I thought it was real. I said, I know. He said, how did I not see it? I said, because you didn't want to see it. You wanted it to be real. So you made it real in your head. He said, I'm 54 years old. I should know better. I said, age doesn't matter when you're lonely. Makes you do daft things. He said, were you lonely? I said, no. But I'm loyal, and loyalty makes you do daft things too. Next day, Sandra's money came through. 2 grand. We went to a Western Union. Picked it up. Booked flights home, leaving in 2 days. Got ourselves some clothes. Toiletries, food, all the basics. Spent the 2 days just sitting in the hotel. Kev barely spoke. I didn't push him. What's there to say? Day before we left, Kev said, I need to tell you something. I said, what? He said, when I met Paola online, she asked me about you. I said, what about me? He said, about your retirement. How much you got? I said, why would she ask that? She said it was just conversation. Getting to know me. My life. My friends. I told her you retired with a decent payout. That you had savings. I didn't think anything of it. I went cold. I said, Kev. He said, I know. I said she was targeting both of us. He said, I know. I said, how much did they take from you? He said, about 9 grand, cash in my wallet, my watch, my phone, credit cards maxed out before I could cancel them. I said, how much from me? He said, I don't know. I said, Kev, how much? He said, I saw them take your wallet. There was cash. Maybe 3 grand. And your cards. They probably maxed those too before you could stop them. I said I had 4 grand in that account. He said then probably 7 grand total, plus your phone, your watch. Maybe 16 grand between us. I said 16 grand. He nodded. I said, and you told her about my retirement money? He said, I didn't know she was going to do this. I said, but you told her. He said, yeah. I told her, I'm sorry, Gaz, I didn't know. I sat there, trying not to lose it. 30 years of friendship. And he'd given them everything they needed to set me up. I said, did you know? He said, what? I said, did you know they were going to rob us? He looked at me, proper looked at me, said, no. I swear. I thought it was real. I thought Paola loved me. I didn't know. I said, all right. He said, you believe me. I said, I don't know, Kev. I honestly don't know. We flew home the next day. Didn't speak the whole flight. Got to Manchester. Sandra picked me up. Kev's ex-wife picked him up. We didn't say goodbye, just went our separate ways. Haven't spoken to him since. That was 4 months ago. I checked my bank when I got home. They'd maxed out 2 credit cards. 4 grand each, plus the 3 grand cash. Plus my phone was worth about 1 grand. My watch, 800 quid. Total, 16,800 quid. Gone. In one weekend at a Finca in Bucaramanga. Sandra said you knew it was bollocks. Why did you go? I said because Kev's my mate. She said not anymore, he's not. I said no, probably not. I showed her the texts, the ones I sent her from Colombia. This is probably bollocks, but we're going anyway. Kev's bird seems dodgy. Going to a Finca sounds like bollocks. She read them, looked at me, said so you knew. And you went. I said, yeah. She said, why? I said, because that's what mates do. They do stupid things together. She said, well, you did a proper stupid thing. Cost you 16 grand. I said, I know. She said, was it worth it? I said, no, absolutely not. But I did it anyway. And that's the thing, innit? I knew it was bollocks. I called it bollocks. I texted Sandra it was bollocks. I went anyway. Because Kev's my mate. Or he was my mate. Now he's just a bloke who told a Colombian scammer about my retirement money and got me robbed at a finca. Absolutely biblical bollocks. Top stuff. Mad for it. Except I wasn't mad for it. I was mad for trusting someone I'd known 30 years, who turned out to be either the biggest mug in Sheffield or in on it. Still don't know which. And I'm not sure I want to know. I've been home 4 months now. Back in Sheffield. Back to the pub. Back to normal. Except it's not normal because Kev's not there. 30 years we went to that pub together. Every Friday. Same table, same pints. Same bollocks chat about football and Oasis and whatever else. Now I go alone. Or with other lads. But it's not the same. I see him sometimes. Around town, in Tesco, at the petrol station. We don't talk, just nod. Keep walking. Sandra says I should talk to him. Sort it out. I said there's nothing to sort. He told a Colombian scammer about my retirement money. Whether he knew what she was doing or not, he's the reason I lost 16 grand. She said you knew it was bollocks and went anyway. I said that's different. She said how? I said because I went for him. To keep him safe. Turns out I needed keeping safe from him. She showed me the texts again, the ones I sent her from Colombia. This is probably bollocks, but we're going anyway. Kev's bird seems dodgy. Proper dodgy. Bollocks written all over it. Going to a finca. Sounds like bollocks. See you Sunday. She said you literally wrote down that it was bollocks. Multiple times. And you still went. I said, yeah. I know. She said, so why are you angry at Kev when you're just as daft? I said because I was being loyal. He was being stupid. She said, or maybe he was being loyal too. To Paola. You were both just loyal to the wrong people. I said, that's proper philosophical for a Tuesday morning. She said, I'm just saying, you're both idiots. But at least you're honest idiots. I went to see a solicitor 3 weeks after I got back. Explained everything. Asked if I could get my money back. She said, from who? I said, Paola, Marcela. Whoever ran that finca. She said, do you have their full names? I said, no. She said, addresses. I said, one address. Might be fake. She said, proof they took your money. I said I woke up on a dirt road with nothing. She said, that's not proof. That's an anecdote. She said, Mr. Whoever you are, I'm sorry. But you went to a house in Colombia with people you barely knew. You got drunk. Or drugged. Either way, your things went missing. Without proof of who took them, without proper addresses, without even knowing their real names, there's nothing legally you can do. I said, so I've lost 16 grand. She said, I'm afraid so. Unless you find them and they voluntarily give it back. I said, they're not giving it back. She said, then yes. You've lost it. I paid her 80 quid for that conversation. 16,880 quid total. Proper value, that. My son called me last month. Asked how I was. I said, fine. He said, I heard about Colombia. I said, who told you? He said, Mum. I said, right. He said, Dad, what were you thinking? I said I was thinking Kev needed a mate. He said Kev needed a therapist, not a wingman. I said maybe. He said you lost 16 grand. I said I know. He said that's mental. I said it is a bit. He said are you all right? I said yeah. I'm all right. Bit lighter in the wallet, but I'll survive. He said I'm glad you're okay. I said cheers, son. He said just be more careful. I said I will. He said and maybe get better mates. I said yeah, probably. The lads at the pub know. Word got around, and Sheffield's like that. Someone asked me about it last week, said, is it true you got robbed in Colombia? I said, yeah. He said, how much? I said, 16 grand. He whistled. Said, that's rough, mate. I said, it is what it is. He said, what happened? I said, went to a Finca with Kev. Got drugged. Woke up with nothing. He said, Kev from the warehouse. I said, yeah. He said, I heard he set you up. I said, I don't know if he set me up or if he's just thick. Either way, I lost 16 grand. He said, you're not mates anymore. I said, no. Not really. He said, that's sad. 30 years. I said, yeah. But that's what happens when you trust the wrong people. I still think about it sometimes. About that finca. About sitting by the pool drinking beer thinking, maybe this isn't bollocks after all. About Marcela asking me questions. About Kev in the pool, with Paola looking proper happy. About the last clear thought I had before everything went black. Maybe Colombia's not bollocks after all. Turns out it was. Absolutely, completely, 100% bollocks. I called it from day one. I texted Sandra about it. I knew it in my gut. And I went anyway, because Kev's my mate. Was my mate. Whatever. Sandra says I'm too trusting. I said I'm not trusting. I'm loyal. She said, what's the difference? I said trust is believing someone won't screw you. Loyalty is standing by them even when you think they might. She said, so you knew Kev might screw you? I said no. I knew the trip was dodgy. I didn't think Kev would screw me. She said, but he told them about your money. I said, yeah, he did. She said, so he screwed you? I said, or he's just an idiot who got played too. She said, does it matter? I said, I don't know, maybe not. Either way, I'm 16 grand down and I've lost my best mate. The thing is, I'm not even that angry about the money. 16 grand's a lot, but I'll earn it back, do some work, cut back on the pub, whatever. It's the friendship that stings. 30 years, gone. Because he met some bird online and dragged me into it. Or because he set me up. Still don't know which. Probably never will. Bernard at the pub said maybe you should talk to him. Find out. I said what's there to find out. He said whether he knew, whether he was in on it. I said, does it matter? He said, yeah. It does, because if he didn't know, then you've lost a mate for no reason. If he did know, then he's not your mate anyway. But you need to know which. I said I don't need to know anything. I know enough. He screwed me. That's it. Bernard said suit yourself. But you're going to drive yourself mad wondering. Maybe he's right. Maybe I will. But I'm not ready to talk to Kev yet. Maybe never. Maybe that's just how it is now. Two blokes who used to be mates. Used to go to the pub. Used to talk bollocks. Now we just avoid each other in Tesco. I told Sandra I'm never going back to Colombia. She said good. I said or anywhere in South America. She said even better. I said I'm done with travel. I'll stay in Sheffield. Go to the pub. Live a quiet life. She said you're 54. Not dead. I said feels like it sometimes. She said stop being dramatic. You lost some money. You'll get over it. I said it's not the money. She said I know. It's Kev. I said yeah. It's Kev. She said then talk to him. I said I can't. She said why? I said because if I find out he knew, I'll proper lose it. And if I find out he didn't know, then I've lost a mate over nothing. Either way I lose. She said so you'd rather just not know. I said yeah. I'd rather just not know. So that's where I am. 4 months later. Back in Sheffield. 16 grand lighter. One mate down. Still don't know if Kev set me up or if we both got played. Still got the texts to Sandra calling it bollocks. Still went anyway. Still lost everything. That's what loyalty gets you. A dirt road in Colombia. No phone, no wallet, no watch, and no mate. Absolutely biblical bollocks. Top stuff. Mad for it. Except I'm not mad for it anymore. I'm just mad I didn't listen to my gut. To Sandra. To common sense. I knew it was bollocks. I called it bollocks. I documented it as bollocks. And I did it anyway. So if you're thinking about going to a Colombian finca with your mate and his dodgy girlfriend, let me save you 16 grand and 30 years of friendship. Don't. Just don't. It's bollocks. I promise you. It's absolutely, completely, 100% bollocks. And no amount of loyalty is worth finding that out the hard way. I'm Gary, I'm 54, I'm from Sheffield. I lost 16 grand and my best mate had a Finca in Bucaramanga. I knew it was bollocks from day one. I've got the texts to prove it. I went anyway, because that's what mates do. Except when your mate's either thick as pig shit or setting you up, then you're just on your own. As you were, this is my Colombia stories. And if you take nothing else from this, take this. When something's bollocks, it's bollocks. Listen to your gut. Don't be loyal to stupid. And definitely don't get in a car to a Colombian finca when you've already texted your wife, it's bollocks. Because it is. It absolutely is. Biblical. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a pint with my name on it. And it's not with Kev. Stay safe out there, yeah? And keep your bollocks detector properly calibrated. Mine was working fine. I just ignored it. Don't be like me. This is my expat stories. Look after yourselves. Seriously.